sidechain and template setup video. You guys have been requesting how I do my mixing and mastering and how I get stuff so loud and all that. So I've set up this little template here. I got a drum beat. So this is just all stuff from the May pack. I got those set up with the sidechain. I've got the bass in a progression. And I will take off all the effects so that I can show you that without it. I've then taken the bass pluck 01 tension, take off those effects as well. And I basically just made a little pattern out of that. So I've got it on the Complex Pro warping function with the formants in the envelope fully turned down, because that's how you retain the best organic version of the sound from it not being funnily warped at all. And I'm just basically pitching each of those to different notes, essentially. So together they sound like this. So you really can't hear the plucks too much. They're sort of sitting back in the mix. And then if we chuck the drums on top of that. It's okay, but there's a lot of clashing. There's a lot of clarity on the lead. If we pull up the span and the loudness meter, you can see what I mean. So you'll see that we're hitting about a negative 6.7 LUFS integrated or long-term loudness. Now, usually my stuff comes out at about -3, and that's sort of where you want to be aiming for. It's like around the -3 to -5 mark. You don't have to. The problem is a lot of like the pros, they have loudness like that, and it does make a difference when you're playing it out. So you don't want your track to be too quiet. So if we look at the span here, because this is the main thing that I use to work out how to set my mix properly. What you'll notice is I have my side information in the yellow, mids are in the green. You'll see that the sub, there's not a lot of clarity on the sub note. There's not a solid, defined, powerful sub there. And you can see there's a lot of side information, which we don't want. And you'll see across the board that there's a lot of side information. You can see where it's red, it's actually overpowering the mids, which we usually don't want. And so in this video, I'm basically going to run you how I would take this basic mix and how I would get all of this sounding clean and loud. So when we go into the bass, I've done some basic processing on this. The first thing I did was add a saturator. So that's just default settings with 2 dB of drive, so it makes it a bit louder. I then added a parallel reverb to create sort of a washing effect. So essentially I made 2 chains, one that's dry, one that's wet. So it's reverb with 100% wet. I've added the low and high cut like this, and I've given it a pretty long decay time. And after that, I've added an OTT on 100% on the default settings. And then it's got a 10.5 dB output boost, just because chucking it on the default quiets it down a lot. So with that, I've then automated up the volume on the reverb chain so that that alone can create like a washy effect, because reverb followed by OTT or like multiband compression is what gives you that washing sort of effect. And on the OTT, you'll notice here I've turned the bass fully down and I've set the low band to about 100 and just under 200 hertz there. So what that means is that this reverb, this chain, when it gets through here, anything below 195 hertz essentially is not coming out. So we're not getting any reverb on the bass there. Or we are, but it's not coming out. It's being cut. And then after that, I've just got a multiband compression, multiband compressor on the multiband compression preset, and that is just at 100% on default settings. Now, if we go to the other bass, this is a simple one, so I just chucked a shifter and boosted the course by 12 st. So basically, it's just pitching these all up by 1 octave. Now, personally, I wouldn't do that for something. You can try different stuff, but I think that sounds a little bit weak. I'd rather just try and get another sample that's better. But for the sake of this, I sort of wanted it to sound a bit off at the start so I can show you guys. Then added an EQ8, so I'm cutting everything below about 200 and giving a major boost to the highs. And then I'm doing a multi-band compression on default settings, 100% wet, and a little bit of boost on the output. So then now we can actually hear that better against the bass. So now if we apply all those settings on there, we're going to see that there's been a bit of a boost in the loudness, and we'll show you what that looks like. So you can see that we had that integrated. It was sitting at about -5 point something. So it got a little bit of a loudness boost, as you would expect, because we've added the saturation to the bass and stuff, but still we're seeing a lot of mid-side clashing and that sort of stuff. So we can also hear that the drums are not coming through as cleanly as they could. They're okay, but they're not that punchy. So the first thing we're going to do is look at how we can get a well-defined sub bass. So the first thing is on this bass here, we look. Basically, I'm going to want to cut the side information and cut the mid information and boost the mid information, and then also cut the lows so we can get a dedicated sub in there. Now, I'm going to do this with an EQ8. I usually use a Pro Q, but some of you won't have that. I would highly recommend getting it. So for this one, the initial one, we're just going to use 2. So the first one's going to be our low cut. So we're going to go to the first band, put it on the hard high pass or low cut. I'm going to take that up to about 120. It's just anywhere between 100 and 150 is usually good. You want to be looking for that lower harmonic here that we're working with. So this would be a bit too high because we're taking a lot of the character of the sound out. So we want to sort of retain the character while cutting as much of the lows as possible. So do that again. Yeah, so you can see at around the 200 hertz mark there, there's like some pretty high information that's coming. So that's a fundamental sort of region for the tonality of the sound. So we want to leave that in there. And what I'm going to do is underneath, I'm going to go Command-Shift-T. And I'm going to drop down a serum. And for this, we're going to make a dedicated sub. So first off, we're going to listen to the bass notes. So if we turn on the headphones here, and we solo that. So that's sort of our sub notes. It's F, G sharp, and then D sharp. So we're going to copy all that and then Command Shift and the down arrow 3 times. So it gets into our 0 region here. So now we can see that the fundamental is sitting in the sub region. Now we don't want all of this stuff up here, so we're gonna get this saw bass out of here and replace it with a sine wave. So to do that, I'm gonna turn oscillator A off, turn the sub on. If I go back to the master, we will see that we now have a sine here. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to go into the effects and apply some tube distortion. So we can boost this up quite a lot. Another thing we could do is add in a fundamental here. So to do that, we'd actually go into oscillator A. So I'll turn off the distortion. And we're going to go into the wavetable editor and go down here to the bottom right-hand corner and go singles and sine. We're actually going to turn down the bin because that's being taken care of. That fundamental is being taken care of by the sub sine. I'm going to turn up bin 2. So you can see now we have this second harmonic that's coming in here. Now we always want the sub harmonic to be the most powerful, so we're going to drop that down. That's looking pretty good there. And then we can start to apply our distortion. So we can see that that third one's sort of coming in. We can also try different modes. I think tube will be a good one for this. So we go back. Now this is a pretty weak sub at the moment, so we're going to boost the output. But the first thing we'll do is get a compressor on there. Now usually what I'm looking for is for this sub harmonic to hit about the -30 here. Or sorry, not the -30, the -24. And I'll show you how I actually level the sub. So what I'll do is I'll put a spectrum on the sub oscillator. Now turn off the auto button here. Then you want to set your upper bound to about 6 dB and your lower bound to about -6 or -8, whatever. What we want is for this harmonic here, this fundamental harmonic, or basically your sub tone, to be sitting somewhere between -6 and 0. Now, if we go over 0, because I'll chuck a utility in front. If we go over 0, that's when we get distortion, because essentially everything peaks at 0. And for my mastering, I actually just use the Ableton output. So as soon as we hit 0, you can hear audible distortion. We don't want that. So that's sitting pretty good there. It's sitting at probably around -3 decibels. So that's a pretty good one. So basically we've just given it a little bit of gain there, and in Serum we've given it a bit of gain there. Again, just the sub. We've got a sine wave with the second harmonic turned up a bit of distortion. We got some compression where we just turned the gain up. Didn't turn on multiband for that one. And if we look at our span, we've got quite a lot of frequencies up here that we actually don't really care about. So what we can do is we go into the Serum and we turn on the filter at the end here and set this to an MG low 24. So it's got a pretty steep cutoff. And we want to chuck the note onto that, because that will mean that when we go further up, then the cutoff is going further up as well. Essentially, we just want to bring a span up and just bring this down. Just so that, like, by the time it gets to the 200 Hertz region here, we're not getting any information. So now what we're going to do is we're going to listen to it without the sub. So what we can do is we now turn on that, so we're getting a loss in the information there. And now with the sub on, So what you're hearing there is that essentially, and what you're seeing is that we now have a fully mono and very steady and powerful sub, which has replaced all of the sort of phasing issues and the wideness that was happening on the first one. So even just with that, if we now check the loudness on our master, so we're sitting at about the same loudness, except we've just got a much more clearly defined sub. So it's sounding better, and on bigger systems it would show up a lot better. Now the other thing I wanted to do on this bass is that I want to clean up the mid-side information. So I'm just going to turn on another EQ and then go mid-side mode. So for the mids, we're going to leave that. For the sides, I'm going to do a cut here. So we're using 6. We want to do something like this. And then just drop it. So I'm dropping about 6 dB across the board on the side information. If we look at that in span, so you're seeing you're getting a lot less red there. In fact, we could probably even do that a little bit more. And a good way to hear the effects of this is actually by checking in mono. So if I turn off this EQ8 and this here, and I turn the sub off, so we just go back to the original bass, you're going to hear in mono that it's okay. But as soon as we turn on this here, and we turn the sub on, we keep that in mono. You can hear that we have a much more clearly defined sub there. Now we've cut the sides a bit, so we might go to the mids actually and turn that up, maybe just 2 dB. So we've done our low cut and replaced it with the dedicated sub. We've done our mid side. Now what we want to do is look at taming some of the harsh frequencies, because if you look at the span here, so this fundamental sort of tonality of the sound, it's coming in pretty hot at about 300 Hertz. And if you go up to the 3 to 6K region, you're getting a lot of a build up here too. So I think what I'll do there is I'll drop down those. Oops, not on that one. Put that on the bass. So now you'll see we're just getting a bit of a reduction in those areas. Now, if we turn on this with our synth that we sort of made here, so it's sounding okay, but we could definitely get a little bit more loudness out of this. So for starters, this synth here, it's not coming through too well. So I think for that, what we would want to do is maybe add some distortion. So I'm going to add a saturator. So now we're at the low 5s. You can see that we've got a little bit more loudness out, but we might want to turn down some of the frequencies that are fundamental in this lead. So if we open the lead up and we have a look at what's going on. Again, this lead has a lot of side information that's sort of overpowering the mid. So I'm just actually going to chuck this EQ8 on here. I'm not going to give it as much of a side cut. Just gonna do that. Now I'm noticing that this low mid region, we're getting a lot of spike here around 300, but there's not a lot going on in those sub overtones. So what I'm thinking is I might actually turn those up. So if we go back to the sub, and I'll show you what I'm doing with a span open. So I'm just going to turn this bin up here. That's good there. Adjust the filter a bit. And then maybe add some more distortion. So we'll go back, have a look now. So you can see straight away that we went down to negative 4.5 left. So we've added a little bit more gain there just by increasing that sort of first overtone on the sub. Now, another thing too is that I think these drums are okay, but they could be a bit better. Now, personally, with my drums, I want them to be punchier. I usually go for a transient shaper, and my favorite is Transify from Joey Sturgis Tones, or JST. It's really cheap, you can get it as part of a pack. I like it because it's a multi-band transient shaper, so essentially you can choose the cutoff frequencies for each of these bands, and it allows you to affect everything better. But usually I'll end up boosting it across the board. So I'm going to turn on the high band. So getting a little bit more punch there. Maybe the mid band. You got to watch out with the low one, because when your sub hits that ceiling, it starts causing distortion. Might want a little bit more knock, so your low mid region. So if we turn it off, turn it on. So you can hear we're getting a lot more punch, because we're not just completely turning it up across the board, we're just hitting that transient at the beginning. Another way you could do this is by using a single band transient shaper, something like your kilohertz one or another one, and you can pump up the attack on that, but then beforehand you could chuck an EQ8 or any EQ, and then as you increase that attack, just increase down the sub a little bit. But I'm going to turn those off because I've already used the Transify one. And I also want to check my sidechain on here. So what I'm hearing is that the drums are still sounding pretty quiet compared to the rest. So one thing we can do for that is we go to the sidechain, and I would have shown you how to set this up in the other one. I might want to make the mid band a little bit wider, perhaps the highs as well. So we're just getting a little bit more space there. And then we could even just try chucking a utility on the drum bass and seeing what happens there. So you can see that I don't know if you can hear it or not, but we're getting some pretty audible distortion now. That kick's not sounding as clean. So one thing you could do is chuck a utility, an EQ8 before that, and just drop that sub down. So without it, this is full power sub, but no boost on the utility. Now we're dropping the sub down, but boosting everything else. We're getting a bit more punch and snap in that high end there. So if we listen now. See, now we're hitting negative 3.5 on that. Now, personally, I think still that the drums are a little bit underpowered compared to the basses. I also think that if we have this lead more centered, that we should probably let some side information come in on the bass. Now this is where it does contradict itself a bit, but you got to play around because different sounds you can allow more width in without worrying about monocompatibility. So some sounds, they just won't be that monocompatible, but other ones will. So if we turn the mono on just on the bass, so I think we have some room to wiggle here. So personally, I'm going to use side widener. Again, side widener is from JST Tones or Joey Sturgis Tones. I got it in the same bundle as Transify, and I use this all the time. It's a really monocompatible widening plugin, so I would highly recommend it. So just without even touching anything. And I accidentally put that on the master, so I'm just going to put that on the bass. So if we now go to the master and we mono, and we just A-B, we're not getting a lot of difference there. So it means that we have some room to wiggle with this bass. So I might even pump the width up and more. But now if we listen in the context of the mix with the mono turned off, so we got the stereo back, now you can hear that the lead is more centered and the bass is sort of more out in your ears. So let's play it like that. So now we're hitting a negative 3.1 on your LUFS, which is really loud. That's good. You can go louder, but again, personally, I think that what we could do now is start to use some EQing on the bass. So we'll reduce the loudness a bit, but we're going to allow more of the frequencies from this bass pluck to come through. So if we just solo those two. Now what I'm going to do is add another EQ8 onto the bass, and we're going to move around a little bit of a dip, and we're just going to see where that lead comes through more clearly. So I think it's around this 400 Hertz region. If we do a pretty wide Q here, without, and just to double check, if we go into that lead and we check it in span, yeah, you'll see that the fundamental tones here, they're sitting around 300 to 400 Hertz. So that's where a lot of the power and character from that lead's coming through. So we're going to want to dip that out of the bass, which should create some space for it. Now, all three together. Another thing too is that you don't want your super highs to be that present in the leads, because we want them to be taken over by the high-end percussion. So if we look at our span, now another way you can do all of this is also by using Soothe. I'd highly recommend this. Again, if there's like 5 plugins that I would say to get, it would be probably Serum, ProQ, 2, Soothe, and then probably the Transient Shaper as well that I was showing you before, and Side Widener. Like, those are the ones that I mainly use. So if we just chuck a Soothe on the lead here, don't know where I chucked that before. Somewhere along here. Or maybe I didn't even put it anywhere. Because this lead is sounding a bit scratchy. So just chucking a Soothe on with the default, so if we take this down, you can see Soothe is doing a lot of reduction between like the 2 to 5K region. Like without it, we're getting a little bit of that harshness in your mid-highs. So if we put that on there, we could also try it on the bass. Yeah, you can see the bass is also doing a lot of reduction. Now, for those of you that don't know, 3.4K hertz is usually a really harsh frequency for the ear. So that 2 to 4K region, or 2 to 5K, you really got to watch out there. And it looks like Soothe is telling us that it wants to reduce a lot of those 2 to 4K frequencies. So now if we turn it on with the Soothe on, in the context of the entire master, so essentially now what we've done from the get-go is we took the bass and we did some processing, so some saturation to boost the volume. We added some parallel reverb to create a wash effect, a bit more compression. We then cut the lows and dipped some of the harsh frequencies, added some more highs, given it some width. And before that, we also did a big side cut. So we cut the sides here and boosted the mids, cut the sides, boost the mids there. But then later on, we've then added in the sides in a more controlled manner. We've then cut out the region where the lead is most prominent and then added some Soothe just at the default setting to really allow that lead through. Another thing as well that you can do is, which is what I do, now this is stuff that only you can do with Soothe, is you could add another Soothe onto the bass, and we can, in Ableton here, set the sidechain to the lead, and then turn the sidechain on in the actual plugin. Now what this does is that when that lead is hitting, it will be ducking the prominent frequencies from that lead out of the bass channel. Oh, I did that on the wrong one. So I'll just take that off. There, that was like that. And it's on the bass one here. This is meant to be sidechained from the lead and turned on. So you can see there, now in addition to the lead and the bass having their own individual Soothe, which is just reducing some of the harsh frequencies, we then also have that second sidechain Soothe on the bass, which is getting the frequency input from your lead channel here. So you can see sidechains coming from the lead there, which is that channel. And then we've got the sidechain turned on in the actual Soothe plugin, and that frequency is then being dropped. We'll also notice that because this is a pluck, it has a lot of transient to it, so we want a low attack because we want this attack, we want essentially the side chaining to be happening very fast. We want to allow that pluckiness. Now you can go even further here, and on the side chain itself, you can chuck a Soothe, and we can side chain this to the drums, and we can just do that on the very high region and make the attack short as well. And we want this to only affect really anything after about 10K. So this just means that basically, because you don't need those super highs as prominent in your basses and leads, what we're doing here is that because all of those are running through your sidechain channel, we're sidechaining this to the drums, but we've made it a fast attack because drums are transient, so they're going to be happening quickly. We want to capture that. We don't want it to be too slow. And we're just reducing the high frequencies from those hi-hats and the top of the snare and the kick. Now if I turn it off, you'll hear there's not too much difference, but visually we're seeing that there is a reduction, so it's making more space and more clarity for that high-end percussion. So now if we play it all together, we'll have a listen. Now obviously, at this point, you can keep on going, but it's a lot of tweaking, and usually you just have to be more skilled at mixing to get to there. But you'll notice for the duration of this, I haven't used a master rack because I don't use a master rack. I've gone through trying limiters, compressors and stuff on the master. I then went to using soft clipping, but I've sort of gone to a place for the last year where I literally just use the Ableton output. Like I just clip, everything's in the red. If you look at my master, you can see it's red coming through there. Now, some people who are more technically skilled will probably crucify me for this, but I found it works for me, and if you feel like doing that, I would recommend it too. So, all in all, what we've done is, if I turn off everything, we've gone from this. Actually, I'll turn on the shifter. Now we have taken it from that to this here. So you can hear that there's a lot more punchiness and loudness. Everything has a bit more space in the mix and more clarity. And because of that, because our mix is now a lot cleaner and we're getting space not only in the frequency range, but also in the stereo field, and we've got a dedicated sub, we've got more punchiness on the drums. You see, just with that, we were able to get about 3 more dB of gain. We were at about -6 LUFS, and we got down to about -3, -3.5, which is a great spot to be in. So cheers for listening. I hope this has helped you guys with how I do sort of my mastering. Again, I don't have a mastering chain, so it sort of comes from mixing. Essentially, my idea with mastering, and what a lot of people will tell you when they get to a higher level, is that it's really just about making your mix better and making all the elements fit together better, and that allows you to push through the master more.